Good afternoon.
Okay, Wes, you are all set.
Thanks, and thank you, Jenny. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the this afternoon's webinar. You might think it's a little odd to be thinking about budgets so early in the fiscal year, but I think it's good practice to be working simultaneously in 3 different budgets, last year's, this year's, and next year's. And it's so it's never too early to start thinking about your 2023 budget. DLGF and local taxing units had a very good budget season, and I'm very pleased that with your help, we were able to certify all 92 counties before the statutory deadlines. So thanks again for being here today, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the bell to be notified of any new material. And Brad and Jenny, I'm going to turn it back over to you to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. We'll turn it over to Fred Van Dorp, our Budget Division Director, for his presentation today. Fred?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fred Van Dorp. Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday. Happy New Year. My name is Fred Van Dorp. I'm the Budget Division Director with the Department of Local Government Finance, and I'll be your narrator for the remainder of the presentation. As Wes and Jenny said, thank you for taking some time to spend it with the department this afternoon. This is the first of the series of webinars that the department will be doing this year. The webinar series is still new to the department, but it's one that it's an exciting tool that we will be using more as we continue to go forward. These webinars allow the department a couple of things that we did not have even a few years ago. One, it's an opportunity for us to provide new content to local government. So with more opportunities to speak, it gives us more topics that we can potentially cover. So 2, it gives us a chance to build a library of different presentations, so that units will have access to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As the commissioner pointed out, we will be posting this presentation on YouTube. So after today, if you wanted to watch this with your staff, if you thought someone else would benefit, another unit would benefit from hearing the information. In addition to having the slides that you can share, you also have this presentation that will be available that you can share with them. The third thing, and one of the things that I'm really excited about, is it also allows us to sort of customize when we're releasing information. So at key points in the calendar, when we know things are coming up, we can schedule these webinars so we're providing guidance directly before we start a new initiative at the department, before we transition to another collection period, before we start collecting information. We can use these webinars to get the information out on how we need it to be done or any issues you could potentially run into. So from a timing perspective, with the, as Wes said, with the budget certification ending, we find ourselves at a crossroads where we have just ended one budgeting cycle. We're at the beginning of another budgeting cycle, and so scheduling a webinar right here at the crossroads gives us a chance to sort of both look toward the future and how we're going to prepare for 2023, but also gives us an opportunity to reflect on what it was that we just accomplished in 2022. And so that's ultimately where the presentation is going, but let me see if I can't set up that introduction just in a slightly different way. So the department is unique in its sort of function and configuration. We're not a very large agency, but we are separated into 6 separate divisions. Now, each division takes turns, or takes its turn at being more or less forward facing. As you can imagine, right now our general counsel, Emily Chrysler, is busy with the legislative session, juggling 60+ bills and making sure that we are reading, reviewing, and interpreting those bills that could potentially change what the department is collecting, when the department is collecting, or how we're going to utilize that information. Our assessment division director, Barry Wood, is currently at the assessors conference. There's a good chance that he is on stage at the exact same time that I am, making sure that the local assessors are aware of all the most recent guidance relating to the valuation of the taxable property that will serve as the backbone for the next year's budgeting cycle. our Data Division Director, James Johnson, and his team will begin the process of reviewing the tax data and adjustments files and putting together the various state reports they use the information for. The IS Division Director, Scott Maitland, and his team are working on taking the additional appropriation application line, getting debt management prepared for debt affirmations, and otherwise creating all that wonderful technology that the department has been able to sort of debut over the last few years. Now, regardless of the division within the department, each department is working towards the same singular goal, and that is the certification of the tax rates and levies for all funds for all political subdivisions. And so every document that you're submitting, every report that you're filing, everything that you're uploading, whether it's legal or technological or budget, we are using all of that information to stitch together those budgets, levies, and rates that we'll ultimately end up certifying. As the commissioner said, on January 13th of 2022, so just under a week ago, the department certified its final budget for 2022, bringing the end of the cycle in. But that individual bullet on this slide does not quite do justice to what a feat that the state of Indiana just accomplished. This is that same concept, just in a slightly different perspective. In 2022, if we took a look at all the budgets for all of the funds on every budget order that we just finished, what we have identified is we have approved, or we have certified, $22.3 billion of spending by local government over the next 12 months. This is how we keep our streets paved. This is how we keep our lights on. This is how we keep this is how we fund the local government. Now, the folks on the telephone and the folks at DLGF are both taxpayers and local officials. And so in addition to looking at what our planned expenditures are for the upcoming year, we can also take a look at what we're looking at from a property tax collection standpoint. This year, the state of Indiana will be paying a collective $9 billion in property tax. This is how we will fund our government. This is how Indiana continues to be the state that works. Another way of looking at it is the certification process is ultimately going to include 11,660 funds. So different ways that we can sort of separate how that money will be spent or how that money is being collected. Not pictured here are the 2,466 units that we're certifying budgets for. So while we're saying that we've met our goal, that we certify the budget, what this slide is designed to demonstrate is what type of feat that is. At the end of the process, units have an idea of what their spending authority is going to be, where their revenue is coming from, and just how complex of a situation this is. As a piece of housekeeping here, as the department is working on certifying the budget orders, we are distributing those budget orders via email throughout our contact lists. If you didn't receive an email from the department, the same information is posted on the DLGF website at the link on the page. When you get to that link, each one of the 92 counties will be listed. Once you click on your county, not only will you see the current year, the 22 budget order, but we also post historic budget information there, so you'll be able to see the last few years, so that if you wanted to do a comparison as to how the current year stacks up to prior years, you'll have access to that information. All right. So with the budget orders certified and distributed, local governments are starting 2022 knowing what their spending authority is and what their projected revenues are. And so today's presentation is really focused on what happens next, right? We are, like I said, in a unique crossroads with one foot in 2022 and our eyes pointed towards 2023. So what can we be working on? What can we be working on? So other than the obvious of rest and relaxation, today's presentation really wants to take a look at those last three bullet points of: one, how do we reflect on the 2022 budget process? We've made it to the end, but what did we learn along the way? What are those things that we would have done differently? What are those things that we still are unsure about, and what are those things that we want to make sure that we resolve before we go through another cycle? Question number 2 that we want to take a look at is how do we interact with that 2022 budget order? And then question number 3 that we're going to be taking a look at is going to be how do we begin to prepare for the 2023 budget order certification process? Now, to do that, I want to look at I want to take a look at the budget division's timeline, or internally how we prioritize, or what our priorities are during different parts of the year. I ultimately have a pretty significant point, but I'm going to take the sort of the scenic route to get there. Now, I should start by differentiating between this budget division timeline and the traditional budget calendar that the department releases. The calendar that we're going to release in February, similar to the one that we received in the past, is designed to identify some of, not all, but some of the key dates that all units should be keeping in mind as we work our way through the budget year. And so whether they are key due dates and deadlines, or whether they are the expected release dates of various reports that the department puts together, or whether it's the anticipated launch dates of various applications in Gateway, we provide a calendar so that we provide a generalized calendar all units, with the hope that the units then turn around and take that calendar to create their unit-specific version. And so the easiest one to come to mind are the ones that will focus on the last day to advertise for your public hearing, the last day that you can have a public hearing, or the last day to have an adoption meeting, where the DLGF calendar will identify the specific dates that the last action dates. What we're hoping that units are doing at a local level is figuring out, all right, how do those last action dates match up with vacations that we have scheduled during the second half of the year, or for the folks in the western part of the state, how those last action dates match up with the covered bridge festivals, and those folks in the greater Fort Wayne area, how do these match up with the Three Rivers or the Johnny Appleseed festivals? If our team is not going to be available, if we can actually adopt on that date, then how do we create a customized calendar for our unit to make sure that we're able to plan in advance for those things that would otherwise prevent us from submitting on those dates? So what we're going to be looking at is a timeline, not this particular calendar. That calendar is going to be released just now, probably in the next 2 weeks. The timeline that I'm referring to is not one that you're going to find identified in statute. We're not going to have sort of a code citation that uses these terms, but internally, this is how the budget division breaks our year into individual pieces based on the primary responsibility that we're hoping to accomplish within that time period. We can look at our calendar in three distinct phases. First phase, or the one that we're getting ready to enter, or the one that we just entered, is the budget preseason, running from January 15th to July 15th. The second time period that we're going to take a look at is the budget workshop season, scheduled to run from July 15th, on or around July 15th through August 30th. The third piece of our calendar is the budget certification season, designed to run from September 1st through January 15th. Now, while we're going to look at all three of these, I actually want to start in the middle and work our way towards a point, or work our way towards the beginning of the year. Which means that I want to start by talking about how the department thinks of the DLGF summer workshop season. Annually, that's scheduled from July 1, July 15th through August 30th. And we know that this is one of the most important services that the department provides each year. While attendance is not mandatory, it continues to be extremely high across the state. Last year, the department held virtual workshops with 2,110 units, or about 86% of units in the state came to the workshops. Now, sometimes those are just conversations, sometimes they end in uploads, but we know that in a 45-day window, the department had direct access, or we were directly engaging with local officials across the state. Now, for the civil units, we know that from a workshop perspective, there are a couple things that always occur. one of the most important things that happens at that workshop is that it gives the department an opportunity to begin collecting the various pieces of financial information that we will ultimately use to help certify your budget. The easiest one to think about are those cash books, those reconciled cash books that help us to identify what that June 30th cash balance is, that cornerstone of the budgeting process that we will be building from. That is one of the pieces of financial information that we're collecting at the workshops. Now, another thing that we end up doing is discussing those process and those procedural changes for the budgeting cycle. So for the folks listening, whether this is your first cycle or whether this is your 5th cycle or your 30th, I'm willing to guarantee that, or I feel confident in saying that none of the cycles that you've gone through have ever been the same. And so one of the things that the workshops allow us to do is to talk about those minor procedural or process changes that you should be aware of as you start the new cycle. If we flash back to 2 years ago, we know that this is where we were talking about those changes we were making to the Form 4B, making sure everybody understood what they were going to see as they went through the cycle. Also in that same 2 years ago, this is when we started talking about the changes to the additional appropriations submission, review, and approval process, just making sure everybody was up to date on the newest guidance. If we look at last year, this is the process change we made is for those units that were requesting an upload, for the department to request a sort of a written request for that upload, to give us the authority to do that on your behalf. So in addition to the DLGF process and procedures, our friends across the street are constantly evolving the law or evolving the statutes that govern how we go through those budgeting cycles. And so workshops provide us an opportunity to share the department's newest guidance on statutory changes. And so whether those are in the form of the memos that have been released or the various webinars, we want to make sure that we are sharing changes that are being made to the process due to any of these statutory changes. One of the other things the workshops allow us to do is to perform a preliminary statutory compliance review of proposed public hearing and adoption dates. So if you have those dates available to us, we can run just a handful of checks to make sure that before those meetings get scheduled, before you actually have them, the appropriate amount of time is scheduled between those key dates. So if that's what happens at all the workshops, there are things that may happen at a few of them. A unit may request from the department at the end of the workshop that we perform an upload. So we will help them to populate Gateway with their Form 3, with the information from their Form 2, from their current year financial worksheet, and a portion of their 4B. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, or these are not all the forms required to be submitted to the department. And so what we're doing is helping units to get off to a fast start, putting that information in the system so that they don't have to commit the same amount of time to data entry. Still a long way to go to get a certified budget, but this is one of the things that we can do to sort of assist local officials in getting their information or getting off to a fast start during the budgeting cycle. In 2021, we performed 1,244 uploads for local officials. And so again, not mandatory, but just one of the other things that are occurring at workshops. And so workshops, there's a couple things we can say about it. One, we know they are well attended. There's a lot of people, there are a lot of local officials that are meeting with the department during that window. I'd like to think that they are very beneficial in making sure that we've got one very specific touch point to make sure that we are sharing as much information as we can to prepare units to go through the cycle. 3, they're free, which is always a good thing for a service like this. The thing is, there is a downside to the workshops, and that is that they're scheduled to last generally about 45 minutes. Now, part of what makes workshop season, why we've got such an important component of what the department provides is only listed at 45 days is the timing of where it sits on the calendar. If we were to start the workshop season earlier, the department would not have all the information we would need to be an effective partner at those workshops. One of the most important pieces of information that gets released annually is the max levy growth quotient, from which the department is able to derive the max levy estimates for every unit, and we use that in our calculation of the estimated circuit breaker reports. If we were to start our workshops earlier, that information may not be available, which would make it difficult to have an effective workshop. So July 15th is about as early as we can start these with as much information as we can have. The other end of the workshop timeline is of August 30th is also impacted by how quickly we need to be able to interact with the data. So if we were to push those workshops into September or into October, there is a chance that units will have missed statutory due dates or statutory action dates before they've had a chance to meet with the department. By limiting the workshop season to just those 45 days, the only way to get the 2,100 units through that time period, or potentially up to 2,500 units through that time period, is to limit the amount of time that we can spend with each unit, which means that for as much information as we are sharing and collecting at workshops, there's very little additional time to discuss every facet or every question that a unit may have relating to the budget certification process. So while it plays an important role in the process, it does not allow enough time for us to take you through every possible permutation that you could run into. Oftentimes we'll end up letting you know what the key due dates are. We'll be able to provide some guidance, but it's not this particular part of the calendar does not give us enough time to have all the conversations that we need to make sure that you're as comfortable as you can be going through the cycle. I think with that one, I think you guys can see where sort of the larger point that I'm working on making. But let me go through one more section. I think it'll be clear. If the workshop seasons aren't that time to have every conversation, or where we are struggling against the amount of time that's available, what happens during the next season for on the timeline? From September 1st through January 15th, the department is going to begin working budgets with the information that's available. Now, we know that the certification timeline for an individual unit will vary based on when they advertise, when they have their public hearing, when they adopt their budget, when they submit that information to the department to begin its review. But for those units that are in a position to take action early, to start advertising, start adopting, to get that information to the department, beginning on September 1st, we are able to begin working those budgets. Now, similar to what we did a couple slides back, what do we mean by working those budgets? Well, when the department has all of the information that it needs, we're going to perform that primary review of your financial information using what we've collected at workshops, what's been submitted, what has been entered into Gateway. We'll start to build the framework of the budgets, levies, and rates that we're ultimately going to work towards certifying. We're going to do statutory reviews to make sure that you haven't exceeded any maximum rate allocations. We're going to review the information that's been submitted about your public hearing and your adoption meeting to make sure it was advertised properly, to make sure the budget was adopted properly. We're going to be reviewing all of those other documents that you are uploading through Gateway, and so those ordinances and resolutions that help to express your fundability or to identify what your spending priorities are during the course of the year. We are going to use all of the information that's being provided. Now, as necessary, the department may be reaching out during this particular part of the year for additional information or clarification. So if you've ever had a DLGF field rep reach out to request your minutes, or to just set up a call to make sure they understood they're looking at, it's all as part of that primary review, making sure that we've got the information we need to certify those budgets, levies, and rates that are being advertised and adopted by local government. Once we finished that primary review, internally we route it to another field rep to do a secondary review, to take that same information and to review those calculations, adjustments, those budgets, levies, and rates to make sure we haven't misapplied anything, forgotten any steps, or otherwise made any mistakes in our calculation. Once that review and then that peer review is completed, the department is ready to generate what we refer to as our 1782 report. It's going to contain those budgets, levies, and rates, along with any and all supporting information necessary to make those calculations. So it's not just going to tell you what budget we're going to certify, or what rate, or what levy. It is also going to show you each step along the process, each step along the way that we would have used to come to those calculations. So So we're not just demonstrating the final product. You get every piece of information that we used. Oftentimes, the 1782 report will come with notes manually entered by the field rep to communicate with their units on any abnormal changes or any specific parts of the report that they should be taking a look at. Once that report is released, statutorily, units have 10 days to review the report and to follow up with the department with any concerns, any requested changes, any corrections, or any additional documentation that is being requested before those values are finalized. Now, corrections can be one of two things. Those could be sort of corrections to what the unit originally provided, but those corrections could also include where the department potentially added when we should have subtracted, or where we didn't accurately implement the law. So the corrections that are listed there are both for issues initially generated by the unit and for any mistakes that the department may have made as we are working through that certification. Now, during that 1782 window, or during that larger budget certification process, the department will make every attempt to explain the changes that we're making, the processes we're going through. But similar to the workshop season, as we are working towards certification, as we are working toward that statutory 10 days that you have to review your budget information, it does not leave a lot of time for extended conversations about the process. And so while certification has a very specific and dedicated goal of what we are trying to accomplish, there isn't a lot of time for additional teaching or training. Which brings us to the third part of our calendar, or the part of the year that we are getting ready to begin, and that is the budget preseason. Now, first thing that we can note is that the preseason represents the single largest individual part of the division's calendar. The second thing we should do when we're talking about the preseason is outline that the goals for the preseason are simple in comparison to both the workshop and the budget certification season. Very easily. Unit outreach, unit support, unit training and education. This is the part of the year where we can have those longer conversations, where we can go in depth into the policies, the procedures, the steps, the techniques that we have gone through in order to certify that budget. This is the time of year where we have time to go further into how the steps we go to ultimately certify the budget. Which brings us back to the beginning. So we started off by wanting to identify, or wanted to answer three questions. The first question that we listed was, how do we reflect on that 2022 budget order process? Well, I mean, one of the ways that we can do that is just by thinking back to what went well, or what was clear, what wasn't clear, what went well, and what can we improve. Another way of reflecting on that 22 budget order process is more mathematical. We can compare what's on your 2022 certified budget and how those values stack up with what was on the Form 3 or what was on the Form 4. In other words, if you advertised $1 million, if you adopted $1 million, but the DLGF only certified 200,000, and that was unexpected, well, now is a fantastic time to have that conversation. What did we do through the course of that process that led to the values that were originally advertised to the taxpayers? Those budget totals that were approved by the councils of the world. Why would those numbers be different than the certified budget amount or the certified appropriation that the DLGF has made available? The preseason is the perfect time to engage with the department or with your DLGF field representative to look into those sort of questions, to put you in a position where next year it's not a surprise, or we know why the department is potentially certifying different numbers. Another thing that we can do relating to reflecting on last year is to take a look at that 1782 and to discuss with the department the calculations, the procedures we go through to ultimately arrive on that budget levy and tax rate. How do we use that 1782 to tell the story of the budget? What is in that report, and how can we interact with that info? Number two, the second question we wanted to sort of examine during the course of this presentation is how to interact with that 22 budget order. We started the 2022 budget orders more than 6 months ago. This budget order is going to live for the next 12 months. I mean, that's the spending authority. And as long as the revenues come in at the exact amounts that we estimated, as long as we buy only what we had listed in that original in that original Form 1, then that budget order will be just fine. But what we know in practice is that there will be new spending authorities. Something will pop up, prices will go up or down, projects will be postponed and delayed. That budget order is accurate as of the time that it was certified, but 1 month from now, 6 months from now, the priorities of local government may be very different than the original budget. When we are talking about interacting with that 22 budget order, how do we interact with a document that will live for 18 months? Another way of looking at it is if there are changes to the spending priorities, if there was need to increase the amount of spending that a unit is going to go through, are you familiar with the steps for completing an additional appropriation? Both the steps locally and from an advertising and adoption standpoint, and from a perspective of how that information is ultimately submitted, reviewed, approved, and returned from the department. The preseason is the perfect time for if you got any questions about those particular steps. The preseason represents the perfect time to have those conversations with your field reps. This next bullet, I'm surprised I didn't put in red or didn't put a gigantic red box around, because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. When we start talking about the budget, we know that we're estimating what we think the circuit breaker is going to be. The question is do you have a way to review what you estimated circuit breaker loss to be to the actual circuit breakers once those values are available? And we're still a couple of months from being able to identify those numbers, but one of the things the department strongly encourages all units to consider is to do a comparison between the numbers you worked into your budget and the actual numbers as they're available. The preseason is the perfect time for the department and local government to take a look at those two numbers together and to discuss how a circuit breaker reconciliation will help a unit to understand their certified budget for 2022 and can potentially help them to understand why they may be in a slightly different position in the upcoming year as they start the 2023 cycle. Now finally, and this is probably the big one, is so once we've sort of reflected on 2022, we know how we're going to interact with the 2022 budget. Now, let's take a moment to talk about how do we begin the process of preparing for 2023. It feels unfair that a week ago we had just put a cap onto the 2022 cycle, and less than a week later we're talking about how do we start ramping up for 2023. But what we know is that we have time now for these conversations, and so we want to make sure that we are preparing you to go through that process. So as we're looking at the 2023 process, well, for those folks that are new to local government or will be attending maybe their first or maybe just their second budget workshop, the preseason is the time to have the conversation of what will the department need at those workshops? What are we expecting the local government officials to have completed before, to be bringing with them, to have thought about before they sit down in the workshops? I know it feels like we are 6 months away from that one, but there are some reports that are going to take some time to put together, some time to figure out how to generate, some time to refine, and knowing where the final product needs to be may help sort of direct those efforts to produce that information. The second one, letter B, there is a pretty straightforward one, but one that always sort of trips us up once we get onto those more sort of pressure, those high pressure workshops or certifications, is just making sure that the local officials affiliated with local government have the right security access in each budget application or in each gateway application. So whether we're talking about the budget application or additional appropriations or the debt management, let's make sure that you've got the security that you need long before you actually need it. Letter C there is a catch-all for every technical process that the department has. We know that there's a lot of information being compiled at the local level. what C represents here is, do we have a full understanding of how to submit that information to the department? How do we electronically get that information to DLGF? And so whether it's just reviewing the user guides or whether it's a short conversation with a field rep, just making sure that you're comfortable submitting that information to the department. The hard work is sort of working together. The hard part is putting the information together. The easy part is submitting it. So let's make sure that after doing the sort of the heavy lifting locally, that we've got a direct path to getting that information to the department so that you can get credit for all of those efforts. Letter D, it's kind of a fun one. While we think of Gateway in terms of how we'll be submitting information for 2023, there's so much information available, so much historical information made available on the public side of Gateway, or even on the login side. And so if you have questions about what historic information that you could be looking at, or have an idea of what your predecessor or your predecessor's predecessor might have done, are you aware of all the information that we make available on the public side of Gateway do we make available to both taxpayers and to local government officials? But the preseason can cover any number of topics. So if we pivot the sort of our perspective just a little, preseason also gives us a chance to talk if there are any counties that are listening, when we are looking at the max levy, which is an extremely important report that we're going to be releasing. While the first half of that calculation is pretty straightforward, preseason represents the perfect time for a discussion on how the department calculates the mental health and the developmental disability adjustments to the maximum levy. We know those values are going to be posted on the report, but if there was any curiosity on how we actually come up with those calculations or how we apply those adjustments to the levy during the certification process, the preseason is the perfect time for that conversation. For any counties, cities, or towns that are listening, still seems like there's a few units with questions about the difference between State Board of Accounts reporting requirements for the NVH and NVH restricted funds and the department's certification of the NVH fund. Preseason represents the perfect time to have those conversations about the differences between these two different agencies and how that information is ultimately reported to the two groups. For libraries, and this is going to be a real priority during the preseason, is making sure that the libraries are aware of what criteria would make them subject to a binding adoption, or where they can find the annual report that the department puts together that identifies the specific maximum allowable appropriation that can be adopted without making them subject to binding adoption. Do we know what that report represents? Do we understand when that report is available? Do we understand how that report helps us to adopt the budgets that we are targeting? Another topic for libraries is just the additional appropriation of who completes it, who submits it, who should be participating in that process. If there are any special units that are out there or any units that are responsible for special units, now's the time for that conversation about who's responsible for the data entry into Gateway. Right, and then who is ultimately responsible for the budget submission, and those are two separate functions for binding units or for those special units around the state. Last but in no means least, if there are any folks from township government listening, the preseason represents a chance for us to talk about your township board's configuration and how that configuration and the individuals on it could ultimately impact your budget adoption process. Also, how vacancies can potentially play into those adoptions. Okay. I promise I won't read each one of these, but even in the preseason, there are a number of other topics that apply to all units. And so whether it is discussions about the process for establishing or reestablishing CUME funds, the concept of trending as it relates to CUME funds, the idea of which CUME funds are inside or outside the maximum levy, the concept of levy excess and how you may have a balance that has been sitting on your books for a while, and processes that we can go through to help make that money available for budgeting and spending. We can help units through the debt affirmation process. We can review your gateway access. Local income tax should be its own 120-minute webinar. We can talk about levy excess or additional appropriations. There are any number of topics during the preseason that we should be discussing. Okay. at the risk of putting too fine a point on it, when we consider the budget divisions year, we've got a couple parts on the calendar where we know we're going to have direct interaction, but we won't have the time to fully go into these conversations. The preseason represents that ideal time for the department and local government to partner in these one-on-one training opportunities. The field reps will begin reaching out very shortly to set up various teleconferences and Teams meetings just to try to engage with you to find out if any of the things that we've discussed during the course of this webinar are of interest, or if there are other pending questions that the department needs to clarify, or if a short call or a Teams meeting will help to sort of facilitate a smoother budget adoption process. Throughout the preseason, my staff will be reaching out to try to engage with local government to make sure you know that we're available for you. And while these meetings and while these calls are optional, this exchange, this part of the year gives us the best chance to provide that guidance, to do those deep dives, to provide those explanations necessary to make 2023 an even better year than 2022. Now, there is one guardrail I want to make sure that I address here. The one area that the department can't help with, or the two areas the department can't help with, through all the outreach that we're ultimately going to end up doing. We can't provide legal advice. We can't provide financial advice. And so what we're looking at here is procedural, right? It's about making sure that the department stays out of the surprise business. We want to talk about the processes that we're involved in, the information that we are collecting, the steps that we are going through. And so as long as these conversations don't venture into the realms of either legal or financial advice, say just about every other topic is on the table for the preseason. Additionally, there will be times where during the course of the conversation, the answer that you'll get from the department is to contact another state agency, or to contact an association, or in some cases to contact your legal representation. So it's not a promise that we'll be able to answer all your questions, but the goal of the department is to either be able to answer that question or to help you to route that question to the appropriate person to answer it. Okay, so that's the majority of the presentation today, or that's the majority we wanted to cover. Just got a pair of slides I wanted to touch on for just a moment. They didn't fit as smoothly into that sort of the main body, so I'm just going to cover two more slides in this conclusion area. Before we completely close the door on the 2022 cycle, I would like to make a sort of an active invitation, or to actively try to solicit feedback from everybody on this call or everybody in local government. The link on the page here is to a survey that the department is sending out. You can also find this link in the email signatures of every member, or for everybody who works for the department. Weekly, we receive a listing of any and all surveys that have come in. We meet, we review this information. The commissioner is actively engaged in what information comes through the surveys. And while in some cases all surveys can be submitted anonymously, if there are questions or concerns, or if you are looking for specific feedback, giving us a way to get a hold of you, maybe a chance for us to sort of clarify anything that is coming in. We know that during the course of the year, if the survey is used to help identify some of the shortcomings that the department has, some of the critiques, some of the things that we can improve on, we will take that feedback. We'll ultimately end up using it to create a better partnership with those local government officials out there. But the survey can also be used for good news. So if you had an outstanding experience with one of your field reps, or you felt that your field reps went above and beyond the call of duty to help you to understand or to explain the information or to make it available to you, and you wanted to share that information, the survey is another way to make sure that not only that the executive team is aware of those individual contributions from our field staff, or from your primary point of contact. So we'll take the bad news, because the bad news will help us, but we'll take the good news too if you're in a position or you're willing to share. Okay. Last slide, and this is more just as an introduction. On February 1st, the department will be releasing new county assignments. So there's a chance that you'll be working with a new field representative this year. The department has added 2 new members to the staff, and we've taken a look at the state, and we're just trying to split it up. We may be moving some field reps to the south, from the south to the north, from the north to the south. You still have access to all the resources of the department, but you just may be working with someone new for the upcoming budgeting cycle. When those new assignments are available, we will send them out via email. They will also be available at the link on the page. All right, so these final 2 slides are the ones we incorporate into all of our presentations, and so they are just a link to the resources or to some of the documents that are available to local government. So the link directly to where we post our webinars, a link to our YouTube page where we are posting all of our training videos, where we are sort of building our library of webinars, information about user guides and information icons, where we'll be posting our memos. All those links are listed on this page. Link to the DLGF main page or to our contact page, another link to that DLGF field rep map, new contact information for any technical questions that you have for that, so that's support at dlgf.in.gov, and another link to that customer survey. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. I want to thank you all for attending. I'm hoping that we set the table to begin a longer conversation over the next 6 months to make sure that if you've got questions, you know who and how to reach out to the department so that we can get those questions answered before we get into those high pressure areas during the second part of the year. All right, that's everything I have. So thank you all for joining today. Otherwise, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny.
Great, thank you, Fred. Appreciate you providing that informative webinar today. As Fred mentioned, and I mentioned at the beginning, we will send out in an email the presentation, the video link to the YouTube channel into the specific video, as well as a survey for the webinar and the CE form. We do appreciate when you provide that feedback for the webinar. We do take that information. We will be releasing the full schedule for this year for the webinars here in the next week. So we do take that feedback and provide that to our directors as they plan for the rest of the year. You can sign up for the remaining webinars for this year. If you would like to in advance, we do have at least what type of topic it will be, either a budget or an assessment related topic. And that is on the DLGF webinars webpage. If you go to the DLGF homepage and then select the 2022 webinar page, it will have all of the dates as well as the topic category. We will put the topics in as we get those finalized, but we do take the feedback that we received last year and any feedback from today as we formalize the rest of that schedule. So please be on the lookout for that email tomorrow with the webinar information and the webinar schedule next week. Thank you again for joining us today for the webinar. We'll see you next month.